Hi, my name is Teresa. I am a graduate student at the Clinical Mental Health Counseling Program at Molloy College. I'm also an intern at the Mental Health and Wellness Center at Molloy College. It serves the public. I'm here today to talk a little bit about social currency, identifying privilege and what it affords you. A couple of notes before we get started. I'm going to read a lot from the slides. I think that it is a great privilege to be able to process two different types of information at once, in this case, receiving audio and also visual. So I'll be reading directly from the slides to accommodate those who struggle with that, and also be adding additional notes that are off slide. So feel free to pause, rewind, to hear things over again if you need to. Once this is recorded and available on YouTube, it is up to you how quickly or slowly you'd like to utilize this information. Also, there'll be a couple of slides I skipped through because I made this presentation to present live. This is a recording, so we won't have the need for this, but I wanted to maintain the presentation so that I can use it in different settings. So again, thanks so much for coming. My name is Teresa, and today we're going to talk about social currency, identifying privilege and what it affords you. So a little bit of an agenda of how we'll move through the next couple of minutes together is first we'll define privilege, and then we'll identify areas in life where it is usually, where there's usually a lot of privilege to be found. And then instead of discussing, I'm going to ask that you reflect on different areas of privilege and how it's played a role in your life. So privilege, what is it? Can anyone provide, or can anyone think of what they might initially move to when they think of privilege? What are your first thoughts when you hear the word privilege? How do they compare to this definition? A special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group. Privilege. A special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group. Having privilege does not mean that you have lived a life without struggle. It means that your privilege was not the cause of the struggle. None of your identities were the cause of your struggle. None of your privileged identities was the cause of the struggle. Sometimes it's hard to acknowledge areas where we have experienced privilege because of the weight of other experiences that affect so many aspects of our life. Not only will we be addressing these privileges to help in alleviating injustices in today's world, but it can also highlight strengths within an individual so they can best support themselves. Let me repeat that. Not only will addressing these privileges help in alleviating injustices in today's world, but it can also highlight strengths within an individual so that they can best support themselves. So there are many different types of privileges, and one of them, or two of them that we're going to be talking about today, is unearned privilege versus earned privilege. Unearned privilege is a special advantage or immunity that someone receives by identifying or being born into a specific group. An earned privilege is a special right, advantage, or immunity that someone receives due to their own effort. You might have noticed that the background of the unearned privilege is a cute little white baby. This is to symbolize how some people are brought into this world with an advantage. The books and the diploma in the earned privileged category represent how hard people work for other types of privileges, or sometimes the same types of privileges that people receive when they're born unearned. So some quick examples of unearned and earned privileges. Unearned privileges can be being born with white or light skin, being born physically able, being born into a wealthy family, or being born cognitively able. For this discussion, for the purposes of this discussion, we can assume that the term privilege relearns to unearned privilege as we go on. Earned privilege can be can be a degree, becoming wealthy, owning a house, obtaining a job, assuming these were gained without assistance. We'll go a bit further into this next, but these are just some of the examples of unearned and earned privilege. Let's establish some areas of our identity that can carry privilege. These are some of the main identities that make up any individual, most individuals. Race, groups of people determined by sharing similar features. Ethnicity, shared language, culture, beliefs, and behaviors. Religion, an organized practice of shared belief in a higher power. Socioeconomic status, social or class standing of an individual or group. Gender, assigned at birth and expression development. Sexual orientation, sexual identity in relation to the gender to which they are attracted. Ability, physical and cognitive functioning. Age, how long a person has been living, and national origin, where a person is from. These are all different types of identities and privilege that play a role in our lives. So let's identify some areas with the most privilege. I'm going to highlight and discuss privilege that comes with each identity. Next. So identities and privilege. Identities with the most privilege are race. For racial privilege, it's white. For ethnicities, it's European or American that have the most privilege. For religion, it's Christianity. Socioeconomic status is upper class. Gender is male. Sexual orientation is heterosexual. Ability is a person not living with disability. Age is middle-aged, has the most privilege, between 30 and 40. And national origin is US born. These are all identities that have and hold the most amount of privilege. So now we're going to break down each one of these identities and how the privilege plays a role in your life, whether it's a positively impactful role or a hindrance. The US has a history of redlining and not approving people of color the loans needed to purchase a house, assuming that people of color can't afford or maintain the payments. Job opportunities are often lost due to a name that a hiring manager may associate with Black or brown people, or an address from an area that is far from work or a less affluent town. History infamously records the stories of the victors and omits the story of people who have been oppressed. This is both because the writers of history books are most commonly white or privileged, and because the white perspective or privileged perspective is prioritized when these recordings are made. So in this image here, you'll see I have highlighted housing, job opportunities, and being recorded in history as three examples of how racial privilege may benefit or hinder you, what racial privilege affords you. Housing, job opportunities, having representation in history. So what gender privilege affords you? And earlier we identified identity that holds the most privilege in gender, and that is males. Underneath each pink letter, I have identified the identity that has the most privilege. In each identity that we scroll through, you'll see it in parentheses underneath. So what gender privilege affords you? Higher pay, respect, and safety. Asian women face the smallest wage gap. They earn 97% of what white men earn, resulting in a pay gap of 3%. White women earn 80% of what white men do, while Black women earn 66% and Latino women earned 58%. A pay gap of 42%. When compared to Black men, Black women earn 89.4%, and Latino women earn 84.8% of what Latino men do. What national origin privilege affords you? There are 3 categories I've listed here. Your citizenship is not questioned if you have a US-born national origin. You can legally work in the United States with a US-born national origin. You can qualify for federal aid. That's a privilege of national origin. What religious privilege affords you? Again, the major identity that holds the most privilege within the religion world is Christianity. Holidays acknowledged at work and school. Those who are Christian are less likely to face violence and scrutiny due to their religion. Those who are Christian are often accurately depicted in film and other media. Other religions may be depicted incorrectly in film and may also be portrayed using a trope, meaning a character that has the same characteristics and the same shtick in different types of films. So holidays acknowledged, freedom to worship safely, and accurate depiction in media and films. Those are some privileges that you may experience if you have the identity of Christianity or another highly privileged religion. So some of the things that ethnic privilege affords you is seeing your life reflected in media, feeling welcome in shared spaces, and language, just being understood, is some of the ethnic privileges of being American or European. The majority of films, music, videos on online applications are majorly based in American or European ethnicities. What socioeconomic privilege affords you? So upper class is the socioeconomic area with the most privilege. Your basic needs are met when you're in upper class. Living in a safe neighborhood is almost guaranteed. You're likely to be free of debt if you are in the upper class. So this is a really interesting one. What age privilege affords you? The most privileged age is between 30 and 40 years old. You have the assumption of intelligence when you are of a certain age, assumption of ability, and most products are created for individuals within that privileged gap of age between 30 and 40 years old. At middle age, people often assume that you are educated on most things academically, politically, and professionally. At middle age, people may assume that you are able, as opposed to a very young or much older person. Most products are created with the middle-aged consumer in mind. Can you use it? Can you pay for it? Do you need it? Now start reflecting on what are some other privileges age can afford you. Being 20 years old as opposed to being 10 years old. Such a great way to reflect on the privileges that come to you purely based on something given to you naturally. When I'm 20 years old, I have autonomy and I'm able to move freely. When I'm 10 years old, I need to run everything down by my guardians before I'm able to do anything. Although, some 20-year-olds might have to do that same thing. So I guess we could say 30-year-olds and 10-year-olds have a great difference in the types of freedoms we have. So ability, this is such an important piece that really gets looked over so often. What able privilege affords you? So we forget about these basic abilities that we have that we take advantage of every day. Being able to hear my voice, being able to see my mouth move, being able to see and read my body language as I'm speaking to you. Having access to any space. When you're able, you have access to any space. Participating in activities is not a problem when you are full-bodied. It is, however, more of a challenge when maybe you need a wheelchair and there's no accessibility for your wheelchair. There's no ramp. There's no place to put your wheelchair. You can't see over the counter because it's been set too high. And then shopping without assistance. Stores don't always take into consideration what is needed for those who are not as able as a fully abled person, whether it's reaching for something, reading the labels, hearing the announcements. There are so many different things to take into consideration when we are trying to address the needs of all those using a particular service. Sexual orientation. So the identity that holds the most privilege for sexual orientation is heterosexual, a male-female relationship. What sexual orientation privilege affords you is marriage. There are plenty of states and places in the world that do not allow same-sex marriage. Safely display of affection in public. Man and woman, male and female, presenting couple can safely display affection out in public, whereas two men displaying affection will not be or may not be received in the same way. Having children. Being able to have children is a privilege. For those who are heterosexual. Not only is it a privilege to just be able to have children, it is a privilege to be free of judgment for having a child, getting pregnant. No one asks you additional questions on how it happened, but if you are in a same-sex marriage, you are not awarded those same privileges, those same freedoms. So a major discussion that needs to be had when discussing privilege is the intersection of identities. We aren't all just one identity. We hold so many different parts of ourselves, and some of them are greater than the other. And by greater, I mean some of them hold more privilege than the others. Intersectionality. Oftentimes, the complexities of an individual's identity will result in a surplus of privilege in one area and disadvantages in the other. For example, an individual may be white, in a same-sex relationship, and disabled. This individual may experience privilege due to their racial identity, but discrimination based on their sexual orientation and disability. Another example is an individual may be Black, heterosexual, and born into wealth. This individual may experience privilege due to their sexual orientation and socioeconomic status, but face discriminations based on their race. Another one is an individual, maybe US born, Latinx, white, Christian, heterosexual, wealthy, and middle-aged. Where might this individual where might this individual be most privileged? Out of all of the pieces labeled or laid out in this particular person's identity, where might they be most privileged? Where might they be least privileged? Where might a person experience discrimination? If they are US born, Latinx, white, Christian, heterosexual, wealthy, and middle-aged. It's a critical thought. So, what are some indicators of wealth that stood out to you when you were a child? This is a good way to kind of exercise your mind and reflect on how you understand privilege, how your foundation of identities and knowledge you assume with identities were created. Thinking back on the thoughts that you might have had as a child and seeing how they might be playing a role in your thoughts and reflections today. So, what are some of the indicators of wealth that stood out to you when you were a child? I know that when I was a child, I was like, if you have a boat, then you're rich, rich. Like, what does that say about me? I thought someone having a boat meant that they were wealthy. And that goes across the board. Like, any type of boat to me meant wealth. I had many of the basic necessities and luxuries of a working class, middle class family, but not the luxuries of the upper class or upper middle class. So for me, a symbol of wealth was having a boat. Think about what your experience was. I had a very privileged childhood where many of my needs were met. Perhaps you didn't have all of your needs met. What was your idea of wealth? So reflecting on these answers really help identify a level of socioeconomic privilege within yourself and in your community. Discussing them together allows us to identify similarities and differences and then learn from them. One of these reflections can be about privilege. What ways have you benefited from your privileged identities? Think back on times where any of the identities that you hold most privilege in might have impacted you in a positive way. So some of my privileges are that I am white and I grew up in a middle class community and I am able. So this played a role in many different times in my life. Being white has undoubtedly made my life easier in many areas. I immediately think of elementary school, where I would not get in trouble for things that my Black and brown classmates would get in trouble for. We would go out for lunch when we were old enough and had the privilege of leaving school for lunch. We went to everyday stationery and I would go in and out of there no problem, but some of my Black and brown classmates would have a harder time because they would be challenged by the store owner who held many biases about who was going in there and why. So what ways have you been hindered by your less privileged identities? What ways have you been hindered by your less privileged identities? Areas that were not included in the list of most privileged identities. So areas where you're not white, you're not Christian, you're not male. How did those identities hinder you? Being a woman has had an impact on my safety and sense of self-worth. Not like really understanding which part of my identity was most important or valued by others until later in life really impacted my ability to to function in society for a long time. Have you ever witnessed someone who was disadvantaged because of your gain? This is a really important reflection. I think it's really hard to acknowledge when individuals have succeeded, where individuals have been hurt in areas where you've succeeded, because we can so often blanket an experience with the good parts or the bad parts. So have you ever witnessed someone who is disadvantaged because of your own gain? For example, a person of color not receiving a promotion when they are equally qualified. I have a couple of more slides for you to reflect on. It's important for you to try and go back to these and think about which questions bring up emotions for you, which questions come easily to you. What reflections are you drawn to? What reflections are you feeling resistant towards? That resistance is information. It's an opportunity to learn and grow. So here are the next few reflections. Have you ever been disadvantaged because of someone who was gaining an advantage based on their privilege? So in your life, has there ever been a time where you have been left behind while someone else who was equally qualified was pushed forward? I'll put some of these resources that I have on understanding privilege in the comments section underneath our video so that you can utilize them to help deepen your understanding of privilege, of your social currency, and what it affords you. I hope that you take the time to click through them and reflect on how this plays a role in your life. Sometimes you play a caterpillar is a great one. I have a short comic that really drives the message. Some of them are goofy and silly, but those visuals really help, especially for people who function kind of like I do. I hope you take advantage of this recording and some of the resources that I've given you. And of course, if you need guidance in processing any of the information that I've talked about today, or have any comments or questions about what I've put out there, please feel free to contact us. We serve the public at low cost and would be happy to pair you or someone in your community with one of our student clinicians like me who are training to become licensed mental health counselors. We're all supervised by Dr. Kellyanne Breedy, who is a licensed mental health counselor, and she ensures that we provide the absolute best service possible. Thank you all. I hope this was informational. I hope it makes you question some things. I hope you reflect on your life and how privilege plays a role.